So I have the tremendous honor to speak to you for a second time and close out the conference. And the reason I say it's a tremendous honor is when I look at the people in this room and in this community, really any of you could probably get up here and give very, very salient opinions on where we are, what you saw, what you experienced at the conference. And quite frankly, all of you have a unique perspective that's really just as important as mine. But for some reason, the conference organizers decided that I should be the person to come up and speak at the end of the conference. And the title is Building the Education Technology Ecosystem at the Speed of Now. So this is not a pre-practiced presentation, so it's probably not going to be very smooth, but it is some thoughts that I've had from the different sessions I've attended and the plenary sessions that speak to some of the bigger issues in IMS, at least from my perspective. But, you know, it's certainly not comprehensive, and it's kind of a mixed bag. A couple of the things are sort of updates, questions I was getting frequently that I want to answer to the broader audience, and just others are just some thoughts and topics that I wanted to highlight. And I'll try to do this as fast as possible so we can go eat, because we're very hungry. The first thing I wanted to say is just, I think it was Mike Giacchetti from Volusia who the other day said there was sort of a different feeling over the last couple of years, more partnership and so forth. And to me, I don't know whether I'm just getting older or sentimental or whatever, but this year, I mean, several times a day I was sitting here thinking, what a great group of people we have in this organization. I mean, you know, the level of partnership that we've been able to achieve here is so phenomenal. Collaboration and partnership is so very, very difficult. It really is, and my hat's off to you. I just feel so fortunate to be involved in this entity at all. And you know, Mark did one of the things I was going to do, which is thank Sandra and the team for the conference, but I just want you to know something about the staff, other than they did a great choo-choo train up to the stage on the first day. That's what we call that. We call that the staff choo-choo train, where they get up and they come up on the stage. I just want you to think about this. Think about this. 90 days ago, we did a meeting. It wasn't as big as this. It was probably 250 people or so. It was very complex. It had many sessions. It went off without a hitch. Lots of progress is going to be made, or was made. Tonight, we'll be thinking about the meeting that's going to happen 90 days from today. 90 days from today. That's what this team does. I mean, that's what this team does. I mean, and they don't only do these meetings, of course, they are actually producing the work of IMS. So I think, you know, the IMS staff really deserves another round of applause. It's really just phenomenal what they've been able to do. And you know, when you scale, when you grow 9 times in 12 years, who's figuring out how to do that? The staff. The staff are figuring out how to handle that scale. And not a week goes by, we have a weekly staff call, not a week goes by where we're not talking about, well, how do we adjust to this? How do we do this better? How do we make this better? How do we make that work, you know? And it's just really been impressive. So part of this was to be a call of action, and I'll have to say, I'm not sure this is more like a call of action or simply kind of a, you know, a philosophy lesson or something. I'm not really sure. But to me, you know, Holly made a really good point of, you know, we've got to have more influence, we've got to have more exposure, particularly to folks that don't normally show up into this type of venue. And, you know, IMS has spent practically nothing on marketing, and I think the board may decide to do something around that. But other than that, I would say that the best way to get people like you is through your own networks, is to talk to other people that you know and just spread the word. Spread the word. That's the best way. That's how we're going to get the most qualified people, because you know who's qualified, you know who you're working with, who's interested in this sort of partnership. So that's really going to be the call to action. The rest of this is sort of updates. What is the status of LTI Advantage? Okay, so what is the status of LTI Advantage? Mark alluded to it. Of course, we talked earlier about the, the endorsement letter, the open letter, and I mentioned in the opening talk how LTI Advantage, I think I mentioned it, I don't know if I did or not, to be honest, but the LTI Advantage is so much different than the first launch of LTI. It's so much different. The first launch of LTI, which has now received literally thousands of implementations, that was totally an ad hoc. Dr. Chuck Severance, I don't know, is Chuck in the room? I haven't even seen him. I think he's locked up in the hackathon this week. But he literally went door to door getting LMS companies to implement the original LTI over a period of 90 days or even 6 months and so forth. He had a major role in helping to convince Canvas to move to LTI. It was coming onto the marketplace. That was a totally ad hoc, uncoordinated, the universities literally almost had nothing to do with it at all, other than probably some of them realized, hey, this was a good thing and whatever. It was just very much a... So LTI Advantage is very, very different. I mean, this is now actually collaboration. This is a thing that shows how far the organization has come, and it gives me hope that we can start to do this with our other standards as well. This has been a coordinated effort between universities, the major LMS platforms in higher ed, and now a whole set of, we now have 20 suppliers that have committed to the early adopter program. And I'm going to say that that's pretty good because we set a goal of 25 by the fall and it's May. So I have a feeling we're going to hit 25. If we don't hit 25, something is wrong. But also, Mark said LTI Advantage is on fire. So this was, I don't know that any of our technical staff, I think, is the hackathon still going on? Is that, no, or is it, it's over? Boot camp now, okay. Well, hackathon, boot camp, okay. So this week, my understanding is, from reading the email last night, is that a bunch of organizations came not really knowing anything about LTI Advantage, or very little. They knew what it was, but they didn't know how to implement it. And 7 of them are walking away this week with an implementation. That's 5 plus 2. 7 of them are walking away with an implementation of LTI Advantage, including several implementations of probably the hardest part, which is the gradebook and scoring exchange, the assignment and gradebook scoring exchange. So what that tells me, not only is the team doing a great job because we're providing a lot of software that made that possible, but the community is also, one of the suppliers came, we had I guess a Java implementation, or was it a Ruby implementation? Yep, but they brought the PHP, but we had already had a Java implementation of a tool consumer that had gone through certification testing. But one of the suppliers brought a PHP version, basically, and now we have that as well. So that's pretty impressive. That's code that makes it very easy for someone to implement an LTI tool. So I would say LTI Advantage is going very well. The jury's not out yet, but especially if you compare it to the original LTI, it's like off the charts, accelerating. And I think the market motivation was very, very clear, and that's always the most important part, about getting a standard adopted. And that is the time has come, as Mark said, the time has come for this set of extensions to be added to LTI. Everyone is in agreement that it's going to provide great value for everybody concerned. Another question I got a lot of is, what is One EdTech really? What is it really? I kind of talked about it very generally. And does it compete? Does it compete with integration platforms? And the first thing I'll do is just point out that there is a very good FAQ out on this website, oneedtech.org/FAQ, that is very, very accurate in terms of what we know about One EdTech today. The caveat is very early. It's very early. We announced it very early. What we did was we got a deal done to kind of get it going, and we started to get it going, and now it's time to spread it amongst the rest of the IMS membership. So it may change significantly, and it's got a long target. It's got a long target. The pilots and so forth won't really be occurring till the fall and the winter, and it'll really not be until 2019 that it'll be fully operational. But I'll just answer straight up, no, it is not a product. It's not a product of all. It's basically a registry. We like to use this term registry, but it's basically a registry and a set of advanced testing services so that we can characterize integrations better, so that we can make more certain that integrations will work and become more plug and play. It does have a very overarching goal, as the name implies, One EdTech Ecosystem initiative. So there's a theory behind this that rather than having 17 or 25 or 32, one ecosystem for every platform, there is just one ecosystem. Because if we're all using the same standards, why do we have to have an ecosystem per platform, right? And that's a breakthrough, and I don't know that everybody agrees with that statement, but I think it is actually the only way the EdTech world gets to the return on investment and the reliability from standards that they want to get to. And I do think, well, and there's a little block diagram here. I don't really know if I want to go through it, but this just basically illustrates what I said, which is that fundamentally what we have is a registry, we have a connection and testing service. The one thing I didn't mention yet is we have security management built in. And security management is the new IMS security framework, and therefore this should be just as applicable to helping get security running, for instance, for LTI Advantage, because it's the same security framework, and eventually we'll do the same kind of testing and matching and characterization with other IMS standards. Probably LTI Advantage will be the next up. But we wanted to start with one roster because that's the one that's sort of taking off like wildfire, and we want to make sure that everybody's really implementing it the same way, and most importantly, that the school districts are getting the use cases covered that they need to get covered with it. I want to throw in a few notes I made during the conference, this aligning with one of the things I talked about in the opening, one of the things that IMS does, in my opinion, defining and enabling the EdTech business and innovation ecosystem. And I thought we heard some great words, particularly during some of the plenary sessions. Some that have to do with, well, what is the ecosystem about? We heard Beatrice talking about learning to learn. We all know about that. I've talked about it many times, metacognitive skills. That's where learning needs to go. But how good are we really at making that happen? Substance versus delivery. That was one of my favorite, Diana Oblinger said that, and it was one of my favorite things because really, we know we're having an impact when the focus is on the substance of the education and not the delivery, right? Right. It's one thing to hook product. Somebody said, Rick said it with the da versus the ah or whatever, right? It's the substance of the learning and the learning content and materials and the tools that we really care about. That's what we're really trying to foster. And we know the standards are working when the organizations have more time to focus on that versus the actual mechanics of getting things to hook together and to integrate together. And then the other thing Diana said that I really loved was this last one, talent building capacity of education. Wow. I mean, I think that is like a really powerful phrase. Do we think of our educational institutions like this? I don't think we do. But this is actually what we should be thinking about, shouldn't we be? Isn't education about helping to build the talent of the individuals and what they can do? I don't know how many of you caught that, but to me that was a mind-blowing thing. So then we kind of get to the how, and what we heard is that the shift from 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or it depends where you are and what your time schedule is from, rather than 15 tools, the teacher needs a comprehensive toolkit. The teacher needs a comprehensive toolkit, and they need access to those tools, easy access, and they need to get the information out of those tools that will really help them teach. The students need to be enabled in terms of their agency. I like to say micro and macro, and what I mean by that, micro means like within a course, macro means throughout their career, right? Throughout their learning pathways and throughout their career. They need to be able to take agency. And then I think we've heard over and over and over again, efficacy, data, transparency. Efficacy, data, transparency. Models, new models, authentic learning. There's nothing new about that, but how good are we at actually implementing that? Mastery versus grade levels. At one point, I was thinking, I forget which day it was, it might have been the first day, it might have been yesterday, that we had a panel, and I said, I'd really like to go start another country and just, base education on mastery and forget about grade levels, just get rid of the whole thing, just let's start new, let's start from scratch and see, I know that hasn't always worked out, but internships, just-in-time learning. When I was first breaking into kind of the education field, 20 plus years ago, I was focused on corporate training, and there was a concept called just-in-time training. It was a very popular concept then. It basically meant that you get the information you need at the time you need it, and computers play a role in that. It pops up. It's just sort of striking me that if you look at the trends, a lot of what we're talking about is just-in-time learning, getting the right module of learning at the right time. And this focus on the high school college continuum, I'm just totally convinced that this is where the gold lies. I was asked, I don't know, it's probably 10 years ago or 8 years ago to do kind of a responder talk to somebody from the U.S. Department of Education at one of the COSIN conferences, and he was getting up talking about stuff, and basically I got up and I said, well, hey, if we want to change something, we have to actually change something. We have to change something. We have to actually look at something. We have to change it. We have to change it. We have to have the courage to change it, and I think this is one of the most obvious areas to look at. So why I went through all that, of course, is because we're interested in what the ecosystem needs to support and what the standards need to support. And to me, one of the most important ideas here is that ecosystem to us in IMS is more than just a word. We're going to all walk out of this room and we're going to hear ecosystem like 50,000 times, over the next year, and no one's going to really, be able to define what they're actually talking about. Well, to me, that's part of our job in IMS. Products from different suppliers working together that accomplish better teaching and learning, that are using open standards that best way to achieve seamless integration, community sourced, developed, and supported, verified and mediated by a neutral third party, and sustained by community effort and investment. And then enabling some kind of cycle of improvement. And I don't know how many of you remember spirograph. Do they still have that, spirograph? I drew a spirograph. What's that? There's an app for that now? Figures. Do you have to pay for it? Yeah. Anyway, so I did a little spirograph this week, and to me, this was just my first cut at all the different things that a good enabling EdTech ecosystem has to touch, has to impact. All of these things. And you can kind of go around, you can kind of start at innovation and go around in a circle. So in other words, you have an innovative product. The innovative product creates demand. Demand typically creates more supply. Supply creates more choice. When you have more choice, you need to be able to deal with scale and agility. Once you have scale and more choice, you need to connect things together, so you need connectedness. Once you connect things together, you want the connections to be seamless. Once you've got connected, seamless scale, hopefully you're getting better usage and adoption. Once you get better usage and adoption, you're looking for achievement. Once you get achievement, you need to do research to make sure it's all working. And then if you do all those things, then what do? You get more innovation. Anyway, I don't know if that's any good or not, but that's what I was thinking about. That was just we'll call that the spirograph picture. Want to call it the spirograph? Jason? No. Yeah, he likes it. Okay. Interoperability versus standards. So we were talking about interoperability being sexy, and we're talking about standards, and I think most of the people in this room know the difference, but I just wanted to highlight the difference because I wrote an article about it. I wrote an article about it, So it was published this summer. So interoperability and standard are not the same, right? Interoperability is the goal. We want things to work together. But there are a lot of different ways to get interoperability. Some are standards, some are non-standards, right? Standards, of course, are things that everybody kind of does the same way, right? So the idea about standards is they're more scalable. They're more scalable, and it's the standards that bring most of the benefits into that ecosystem that I just drew there. It is at scale. It isn't pure interoperability. Hey, I've been doing software my whole life. I've been doing software for more than 40 years, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out how to integrate two products together if you know how to write some software, right? But the question is that a repeatable, scalable integration? That's the question, right? And every product has APIs, and this is one of the things that confuses people a lot. Every product has APIs, and APIs are very valuable, and they're definitely better than trying to read stuff out of a database, with some kind of ETL process or whatever. But APIs by themselves are not standards. What we need is we need a set of standard APIs, right? If we want to use APIs, and that's where we need to go. Because a lot of people get confused and say, well, this product has an API. Well, that's great. That means you can get data out of it without having to, basically get into their database or whatever. That's awesome. But is that a standard? Well, it could be a standard if it's based on a standard, but if it's not based on a standard, it's not. The idea of my API being a standard, that's what in business is called a platform strategy. That's a platform strategy, and I'm going to talk more about that. That's how I become the dominant platform. I publish my APIs, and you all use my APIs. So you are my ecosystem. I now control you, right? And there are companies that can do that. Big consumer internet companies can do that. So the important thing we need to remember about standards is they lift each of us up because they help each of our organizations, but they also lift us all up. They help us all. They raise all of our boats. And that's how I think of it, and that's the difference between standards and just pure interoperability. Interoperability lifts two pairs of partners up at a time versus lifting everybody up. So that's the difference, right? So I hope this won't be too controversial here, but one of the things that really hit me hard this week is platforms are a scary proposition in education. And what I mean by that is this. It's kind of like this. So in the commercial world, the concept of a platform is you use my thing and I get all your data and then I make money from your data. Right? That's what LinkedIn, right? Facebook, you just kind of go all the way down the road. You use my thing, I get your data, I make money from your data, right? And what we figured out is that can have some negative impact on some things, right? That's what we figured out. And I'm not saying I see anybody in the education sector doing this, so I don't want to be scary or alarmist or anything. But it actually is scary in society because I found, this is an amazing statistic, 62% of adults in the US get their news from social media, primarily. That scares me a little bit. That may explain some things. But I think what we have to work on in terms of a community is that, sure, we're going to have lots of platforms. I would probably personally, from a marketing point of view, stay away from that name, platform. Because personally, I would. If I was running a company right now, I would say, I don't want to call my product a platform. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm not right about everything. But it's going to be very, very important as we do more of this data stuff and we want to have transparency, right? We're going to have a way to make sure that you're not locked into your data platform. And I don't know how to do that exactly. That's a complicated problem, but we're going to have to work on that. And so finally, I wanted to talk about, I think this is my last piece, I want to talk about brain trust. So we're kind of like a brain trust, I think, aren't we? IMS? You guys think so? How many think we're like a brain trust? How many think we're like a trust brain? Never mind. But what I mean by it is we require brains and we require trust. So this is a partnership. This is a partnership amongst very, very bright people and leading organizations, right? So that's the brains part. But in order to really cooperate and be true partners, we have to have trust. And to me, that's really, kind of at the end of the day, that's a really important part of IMS. It's a really important part of IMS. Someone from another association attended one of our quarterly meetings, one of the last couple of ones, and they came up to me and said, "I can't believe it. I was in that LTI meeting and they were arguing." And I was like, these are competitors. If they're not arguing, something is wrong. Something is wrong, right? If they're not arguing about something, I would say we're not going to really get to a very good standard or something, right? So the point is we know we have conflict, we know we have arguments, and as I think Tim said very well, we want to hear all sides of the story. But IMS is dedicated to being neutral, to having a community governance, not controllable by one or even a few parties. And most importantly, you can count on us to not pit our members against each other. If there's some kind of conflict and we think our members are getting like this, we try to get with them and say, that isn't how we do business in IMS. That isn't what we want to see. We want to make sure this gets worked out in an equitable manner so everybody's satisfied, and usually it works out. So I'm going to end here talking about the Babe Ruth again. Hopefully most of you guys saw the initial talk about the Babe, and this is a little bit of philosophical, I think. But most people who've heard me talk at these learning impact events know that I like to start with something and then at the end kind of tell the other part of the story. You know, like who was that guy that did the rest of the story? Who's that guy? Paul Harvey, right? Yeah, kind of like that. So to me, the rest of the story about the Babe is that, you know, he loved baseball. He loved baseball. Baseball to him was not a sport. I mean, it was a cause. It was a cause. I mean, if you go back and look at the films they have of him or quotes about him, it's all about how baseball saves kids' lives, basically. And it might have had something to do with his experience because he, you know, of his 7 siblings, only 2 made it, including him, made it out of childhood. And at age 7, he was put in an orphanage, which is where he learned how to play baseball. From age 7 on, he was in an orphanage. And he just thought baseball was like the savior of life. You know, he just loved baseball so much. And he had some great sayings like baseball is metaphor for life. He used to say, "Every strike brings me closer to my next home run." I just think that's a great saying. So what does that have to do with us? Well, you know, I think most of you have probably seen this quote about, you know, education. And I think education and learning, we're very blessed, you know, here because we are working with something with a higher calling. And this quote to me is a great quote, but I like to think of this as, and I've said it many times, education is the challenge that underpins all other challenges. Any other challenge we're going to solve is going to require that education is good, that our education is good. And to be honest, you know, one of the biggest challenges to our existing education is our ability to change our education, right? We're sitting here in a moment in time where we know that evolution is needed to our educational system. Are we going to be able to do it? Well, to me, that's a test of how good our educational system was and how educated we actually are and how smart we actually are. And I think that's really important. So I just wanted to follow up with, you know, hoping all of us can kind of make this commitment where we let IMS be a place where our love of education and learning enables committed partnership that lifts each of us up and lifts all of us up. And thank you very much, and I'll see you at lunch, and I'll see you next year in San Diego.